So I already have all the art. I'm going to minimize Discord, but if you have any questions, feel free to speak up. Hopefully I'll hear you. Okay, so in my project folder in the UI section, I made like the titles here, and I made these instructions here, and then I have all of my different buttons. So that's what we're going to put into the game. They're already there in this UI folder, so I'm just going to go ahead and open up project.godot and open the Godot engine. And so we're going to be creating a different type of scene in this example than what we've created before. And we talked a little bit about this on Tuesday, but we'll talk about it more now. So I'm going to go to my scenes folder and create a menu scene. So I could just start with this like empty scene, but I like to create my scene first. So I'm going to right click and say new scene, and I'm going to call this menu. Go. Oh, and I have to choose what node it is first. So I'm going to click on user interface. Okay. And so notice that my node, it's called control now instead of like node 2D or something like that. And it's green. So I'm going to save this. Okay, so now it's down there in my scenes. And I'll close this tab. So now I just have the menu. And so the user interface works differently than the rest of our game. So we kind of briefly talked about this on Tuesday, but I'm going to talk about it a little more. So I'm going to bring up my pen tool for a second. And so there's a few differences. The main difference between our game and the interface. So if we kind of imagine our game window as like this little window instead of the bigger window that we see on the screen. And let's say the yellow components are our game components. We have like our character, and we might have like a little enemy over here and some trees and stuff in the background. But then we're going to have more parts of our level. Like we're going to have another enemy over here and another bad guy over here and some trees and some more trees. And, you know, when we move the character, as we move the character around, what we're actually doing is, depending on how you have it set it up, you're moving this window back and forth or up and down. And so as the window moves, you see a different part of the scene. So that's good for everything that's part of our game world, but for our UI, those things need to stay in the same place. So we use a different part of the canvas. We use a completely different canvas actually for our UI. So for example, I might have some information up here, like how many lives does my character have? And you know, how many points do they have? Like if we have some coins and I have like 100 points. And you might have, you know, like we talked about adding a mini map. So you might have like a little map down here. You might have some, you know, other stuff down here. And so that UI has to move with our game window. So even though our player, you know, might be like over here and our game window is going to kind of like follow them over here, our UI has to stay with the game window. So we have to put it on a different layer that doesn't react to the changes with the camera that's following our player around. And so we render the game using the camera, but then we render the UI using a different canvas. So the other thing that we have to think about when it comes to UI is how to lay it out. And so we can also think about that for a second. So with our game, we just put stuff where we want it to be, and the character just walks around, and it you know, no matter how big our game window is, if our game window looks like this and our, you know, player is like this and our world is like this, we've got some trees over here, it doesn't really matter, you know, how big they are, because we can just move the window to show what's in the game world. But our UI has to fit inside of this window because the UI is always there. And so if the window changes, like if the window gets bigger on somebody else's screen or something like that, we have to account for that. And so we have to use a different layout system for that. So you can see there's this like orange square. And when we're doing our stuff with our UI, we're going to be setting things up like, we can say we want something to be centered. So it'll be directly in the center of this orange square, regardless of, how wide or big it is. We can also say, we want something to be pinned up here, or pinned down here, or over here. And then we can also say, move it in that far, or move it in that far, or whatever. So everything in our UI, when we do the layout, is relative to this main sort of square. And either, is it centered, right or left? Is it on the top or on the bottom? So it's a different way of doing layout than just like placing stuff into the game world. So that's kind of what we'll go over. And as I mentioned, the layout system for Godot is a bit idiosyncratic, but it's not too bad. Once you get used to it, you should be able to do anything that you want to do. So let's create our start menu. So I'm going to take this control node and I'm just going to rename this menu. And so the one thing that thing that will help you as you approach doing layout with the Godot UI system is you're going to use a lot more nodes than you might think that you need to use. It's not like CSS, if you've ever done like web development stuff where you can add like a bunch of different rules to like your paragraph or your div or something like that. It's more like each node has its own rule. And so for every thing that you want to do, you have to add in more nodes. So the first thing I want to do is actually add in a container. And I want to kind of center everything on the screen. So to do that, I'm going to use a center container. So I'm going to right click and add a child node. And you can see the control area here. If I look in here, you can see all the green stuff is different UI layouts that do different things. And under the container, you can see a bunch of different containers. These are things that don't actually have content. They just align the content in one way or another. And so what I want to start with is a center container. I might have to move stuff around at some point, but I think this will be good. So I'm going to click and create a center container. And so now I have some stuff that's related to my container. So you can see these green things up here. These relate to the anchor point where the content is anchored within our screen. And if we change the sort of layout of this container, those green points will move somewhere else. So right now, I'm just going to leave that in the top left. There's also these red things that change the size of the container. But most of the changes you make visually don't actually do anything. When I run the scene, Godot is just going to reset them. It's just going to ignore them because this is a center container and the only thing that it does is center stuff. So the only thing I really want to do here is click on layout, and I want to make this a full rectangle. So I want my main container to be the size of my entire game window. So the layout tab is really useful. This layout thing up here with the anchor, this is really useful for resetting and setting up your parts. Okay, so I have my center container. And so next, what I want to do with this menu, there's a lot of different ways to set up a menu, but what I'm going to do is basically just have my title for my game here. And then I'm going to have a graphic down here. And then I'm going to have some buttons like this. And so it's a good thing to lay out what you want to do before you actually set it up. So I can look at this and say, okay, I want this to be centered. So I need the center container. I already have that. And then my main layout has 2 columns. And then this part has 2 rows. And this part is going to have however many rows I have buttons for. So the first thing that I'm going to add into my center container is a horizontal box. So if I type in horizontal, oh, no, that's not what it's called. Let's go to control, take a look at container. Uh-oh, did they change this on me? Oh no, here, it's just called Hbox. So it's not horizontal, it's just called Hbox. Okay, so we have an Hbox. So anything I put inside of the Hbox is going to be laid out in 2 columns. And so now let's actually add something that we can see. We can adjust this later if we want to. So let's add a child node. And this time I'm going to add a texture. So a texture rect is just like the most basic thing that we can put an image in. And so I'm going to create a texture rect. And I'm going to call this the title of the game. And so now I'm going to add in my texture here. So over in the inspector, the first property in the texture rect is the texture itself. If I click empty and go to load, I can go to my UI and go to titles and get the title of my game and click open. Okay, so there's my game. It looks centered because it's in a center container. And inside the Hbox container, I only have one column. So that's going to be centered. So that looks good so far. So then quickly, I mentioned this yesterday, but the reason I made my game image white is because I can go down here to the canvas item. And so now I can change the color here. So depending on, the theme of the game, or if you have this same title in multiple places, this is kind of convenient because I can change the color. So I can choose a color that goes along with the game. And it works better if it's white because I can go fully from white to black and all the colors in between. If I start with black, I can't really add to it. So I'm going to go with like a little green color. That looks pretty good. And I'll just leave that. So of course you don't have to do that, but that's a nice option that you can use. Okay, so I have my game and that's looking pretty good. So let's add another section. So for my buttons, I'm going to have multiple buttons. So I need another container for that. So I'm going to click on the Hbox container and add a child node. And these are going to be on top of each other. So I want a Vbox container. So I just typed in Vbox and I get a Vbox container. And so now we can see this is aligned here. And so now we're going to add in a button. And so if I click on the Vbox container and add child node, now I'm going to type in button. You can see there's a whole bunch of different types of buttons here. And some of the buttons have these like pre-built Godot graphics, like a check button, checkbox, all these different things. So those might be useful. I made the art for my buttons, so I don't really need that. I'm going to choose a texture button, which is going to let me put in the art that I created for my button. So I'm going to click create. And so my first button is going to be the start button. So I'm going to rename this guy start. And so then for the texture button, there's multiple textures. So over in the inspector over here, when I click under textures, you can see all of the different options. So I don't have to fill in all of them, but I want a couple. So I want the normal option. That's just, when it's sitting there. Pressed is when I click on it, and then hover is when I hover over it. So I want at least those three options so my user knows, that the button is working. So I'll start with normal. I'll click empty, go to load. Go to my UI. Here is my start button. And I'm going to use this first one as the normal. And it's kind of small. I might want to make that bigger. I could go back and export the art again, or I can, let's see, go to rect, I think, and scale it up. So let's scale it up to 2 by 2. Okay, that's a little bit better. So let's leave that. And then I'll go to pressed. And so I'm going to go to load, go to UI, go to button start. And so when we press, let's use this one. And then when we hover, I'll just add in one more. And so I made 4. I don't really need 4. I'm going to go with this one for when I hover. I think that'll look nice. I'm going to click open. And if we want to see that in action, I can preview the scene. And so you can see when I click, I get one state, and when I hover, I get another state. And it still looks pretty small. I wonder, oh, it seems like it undid the scale. So yeah, that's something, let's take a look when I go to the rect. It may not let me scale it here. I feel like maybe there's a scale container. Let's add child node. Oh, no. Okay, so I'm gonna leave that for now. But if I want to make it bigger, I may have to edit my original art. See that again. Yeah, it definitely is like smaller. So it's too small, but I'm not gonna worry about that now. I'll fix the art later. Okay. I can just replace the art and it'll fix it. Or maybe it's not. Maybe let's try scaling it up even more. I'll scale it to 4. Oops. Maybe it's just a lot smaller than. No, it's definitely not scale. Okay, let's reset that. So I'll fix that later. And so yeah, the nice thing about the button is I have 3 different images, but if I do the visibility modulate color, it's going to apply it to all the images. So if I want to use the same green color, I can use the color picker here and just click on that green. And now when I preview the scene, all 3 of those images, the white is replaced by that green. So that's why I kind of did that with the UI. It's kind of nice to have that functionality, so I can have different color buttons. All right, so I'm gonna add another button. So the easy way to do this is just to duplicate the button I already have. So I'm gonna click on my start button and I'm gonna hit Command D for duplicate. And let's do this as the instructions button. And so this is gonna behave the same way. The only difference is that I'm going to change the textures. So I'm just gonna reset all of these and then go to load and UI button instructions. And you don't have to, but it makes sense to use the same changes for the different states. So I use that for pressed, and I use this one for the hover. So I have start, I have instructions, and let's do one more. I need a quit button. So I'm gonna duplicate this one, call this quit, and go to the textures and reset those again. Go to load, by button quit, add these. Press, hover. Okay. So this looks pretty good, but you can see my my vertical Vbox container is not really like aligned with the Hbox container. So we may need to center these. So we may need to add more vertical. We may need to add more center containers to make this work. Let's actually see if I can change the layout. No, I can't change the layout because they're part of the center container. Okay. So how do I do that? Let's add another center container and see if that fixes things. I'm going to go to Hbox and add a child node and add a center container and then put my Vbox in. Okay, now we're centered. Okay, so that's one of the things that's kind of tricky about the way that the layout works is if I want to center the contents of my Vbox container, I need to put the Vbox container in a separate center container. So that's kind of a good example of one of the tricky parts of the Godot layout system. Okay, so I have this center container. So then for my title, I also want to add in my graphic. So I want another Vbox container for that. And I already kind of know that I'm going to need a center. So I'm going to go click and add another center inside the Hbox. And I want to go up here. I'm going to put the title in there. And then I'm going to add another Vbox. And put the title in that one. And then I'm going to duplicate the title to get another graphic. And for this graphic, I will go to load, go to UI titles, and get my little image for my game. And there we go. So the buttons look really way smaller than the game graphics, but I can make them bigger and fix that. And that's looking pretty good. I wonder what'll happen. What if I just put the Vbox container here? Yeah, that's not. If it's, that's okay. All right, so it's not perfect, but this is a pretty good kind of start. The green is a little dark, so I might bring the green up a little bit. Let's go. I'm going to select all of these 3 buttons and go to visibility and try something a little brighter. That looks pretty good. All right, so we've got our images set up. And so now we can add some functionality, which is going to require a little bit of coding, but it's not too crazy. So let's pause for a second. Any questions on any of the layout stuff so far?
No, it makes sense so far.
All right. Okay. So we're gonna add in a little bit of code to make these buttons work. And I'm gonna do something a little bit differently from how I've done this in the past because I want to demonstrate the couple different functionalities that we can do with the buttons. So I'm just gonna start to create. I need a script to handle all the different button presses, and I could put a script on each individual button. But that is, adding a lot of unnecessary files. So instead, I'm going to make one main menu script that I can use anytime I need a menu. So I can use it in the game or out of the game or in different places. And then I'm going to add the button events to that script. One thing I just noticed is that my title, did I add? Oh, I duplicated the title, which is why this one looks really green. So let's change this to graphic and then undo the modulate color. Okay, there we go. That's why it was looking kind of weird for a second. Okay. All right, so let's add our script first. So I'm going to click on the main node. I want this script to be on the main node. And I'm going to click on the empty and click new script. And menu.gd is good. I'm going to put this in my scripts folder and click open and click create. And just like all of the other main scripts that are in the class that I'm using or writing in class, there is a copy of basically the same thing in the assets folder. So if you download the assets folder and look at scripts, you can see there's a menu script right here. And there might be a little bit, there's going to be a couple differences from how I'm going to do it here, but it's basically the same thing. So I've got my script, and the first thing that I need to do is connect my button. So I'm going to click on my start button and go over to the node section. And so there's a node for pressed. This is just obviously when I press the button. So that, that'll work fine. There's other nodes for things like mouse entered or mouse exited. We'll probably use those when we add sound a little bit later. But button pressed is when I click and then unclick the button. So it's both the down and up events together. So I'm going to double click on that and connect it to the menu. And so it's already connected there. The receiver method on start pressed is fine. So I'm going to click connect. And so now we have some code here. And so what we want to do here is actually add in our scene. And this is kind of the trickiest part of what we're going to do today. I need a reference to the scene. So when we click the start button, we want to load in one of our scenes. Forget what scene I was working on. I guess I'll do the default scene for some stuff in there. Okay, so back to the code. So the way that I can do this, I need another variable. So I need a variable and I need a reference to the default scene. But I want to make this something that I can edit so that, a designer could use it or anybody else who's working on the game. So I'm going to put export in front. And then I also need to use a specific type of reference, which is a little bit confusing, but it looks like this. I'm basically looking for a file. So I'm looking for inside the scenes, this default scene. And so there's a couple different ways I can tell Godot to look for that. One way is using the .tscn file abbreviation. So I can say asterisk, which stands for any scene, and then do .tscn. And I may need to add something else, but I think that should... No, it's confused. Actually, let me look at the menu script real quick so I can remember what it looks like. open with, not giving me, I'll use the notepad. Okay. So let's just leave that here. So yeah, what this is saying is it's a string, it's a file, and then .tscn. So I forgot the first part. So first we're telling it it's looking for a string, which is just a reference to a file. And then the type of reference is a file reference. And then star.tscn is what type of file it is. So I think that should do it. And so when I click on the menu now, you can see the default scene here. And if I click on this little folder, I can choose what scene this button opens. So I'll go to scenes, click on default scene, and click open. So now I actually have to open that scene. So once I click the start button, it's gonna go here inside the start button. And there's a special Godot function for this. I forget what it is. Let's look at our notepad again. GetTree.change scene. Okay, so get_tree. So this means it's getting the node tree, which is Godot's representation of all of the different parts of our game. And then we can say change scene. And then that's when we can put our default scene reference. So we could write the path to the default scene directly in here and not deal with this variable. But we need the variable in order to create the script variable over here so we can easily change the scene later or in different places. Like if we have the same menu, but we have it in level 2 and we want to go somewhere else, we can change the scene just in that level. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'm going to hit play. And if I click start, there we go. We opened our scene. And so that's actually pretty powerful because it's not just going from the start menu to the scene. You can use that to go from one scene to another, regardless of what the scene type is. So it could be 2 different UI scenes. It could be 2 different game scenes. It could be a scene that's your inventory, like you could move to your inventory and do some stuff in there. So, in this context, we're just using it to go from the menu to this first scene. But keep in mind that you can really do anything else with this that you could think of. All right, so that's our start button. Let's do our quit button next because this is going to be really simple. And then we'll do the instruction buttons after that. So I'm going to click on the quit button and go back to the node section and double click on the pressed event. And so now we can connect our signal to the menu. So I'll just click connect. And so here I can get rid of this and to quit the game, I forget what the code is. Let's take a look. So get tree and then just quit. So similar thing, get tree is getting the Godot hierarchy, and then we can just say quit. And that's pretty easy. So this will work regardless of where we are in the game. We can check this out. So if I preview and click quit, the game quits. So not very exciting, but a good functionality to have here. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is a little bit different from how I've done this in the past. But I think this will be useful for anyone who wants to have UI that's changing stuff inside of your game. So even if it's not related to like the metrics or the menu or different buttons, like you can use this to, change other components of what's happening in the game. So I'm going to do just a quick example of this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in another container that has my instructions in it. So instead of moving to a completely different scene to look at the instructions, I'm just going to hide and show 2 different containers. So what I'll actually do is duplicate. I'm going to rename my Vbox container title graphic, and I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to hit Command D, and I'm going to rename this one instructions. And so then I'm going to delete the title because I don't really need 2 nodes. So I'm going to right click and click delete. And I'm going to take this graphic and I'm going to replace it. I'm going to go to load, go to UI. I'm going to replace it with the instruction. Okay, so now I have my instructions here. And now what I'm going to use my code to do is basically turn off the graphic and turn on the instructions. So I'll turn on the instructions, turn off the graphic. Kind of looks like it's wiggling the layout a little bit because I think, yeah, it's changing the size of, I guess, this main Hbox container. That's okay. I'm not going to worry about that for now. All right. So the way we're going to set this up is with a little bit of code. So I have my graphic and my instructions, and I need to turn one on and turn the other off. So in my code, I need a reference to both of them so that I can put those in there. And then I can change the visibility using code. So let's go back to our script. And so I need a couple more export variables. And I need references to my graphic and my instructions. So these are going to be like the references I have to my player in my scene manager, where I'm going to get a node path, and then I'm going to load the node that's there. So I'm going to start with the title. So I'll say export, and then hint is node path, and then it's a variable, and let's call this title path. And then on ready, so we're going to load this before anything else happens. Var title gets get underscore node title path. So that'll load in a reference to our title graphic. And then we'll do the same thing for our instructions. So export node path var instructions path. And then on ready var instructions is get node instructions path. So it's a bit tedious. If you had like a ton of these, you would probably want a script that would like go through and just load them automatically without doing each one individually. But that's something that we could talk about how to do if that was something you wanted to do, if you had like a big inventory system or something like that. So then once I've loaded these things, one thing I'm going to do is I could just toggle off the instructions visibility here. But you know, if a designer comes in and changes it or something like that, I want to make sure that the code knows that that's not supposed to be visible. So I can say instructions dot visible, VIS, and I'll set that to false. And so that'll just make the instructions invisible from the beginning. Oh, and it's telling me, oh, I have to put this in a function. Whoops. Okay, so we need a ready function. I don't know if we've done this before, but sort of just like our onReady keyword, I can make a function called ready, and this will execute before the rest of our scene loads. So that fixes that issue. And so now if I play, oops. Invalid set visible on base null instance. Okay, so I didn't actually set these variables, so I have to assign this. So for my title path, I have to click assign and go to title graphic and click OK. And for instructions path, I have to click assign and go to instruction. Okay, now I have a reference to both of those, and I'll go back to my script and try it again. Okay, so now you can see the instructions are turned off when we load the scene. And now if we click the instruction button, we just want to flip those. So let's choose our instructions button, go over to the node and double click on pressed. And I'm just going to connect it to the menu, so that's set up correctly. And so now we have on instructions press. So we're going to copy this line and just say instructions equals true. And then we're going to take the title and make that invisible. So we'll say title.visible equals false. Okay, so now if we run our scene, so if I click on the instructions, it changes to the instructions. And if I click start, it starts the game. And let's go back and let's just change the color of the instructions. So I'll go here and go to visibility, click modulate. I'll use the color of the main character. So I'll click on the color picker and click the main character. Maybe that'll look kind of cool. Okay, All right, so that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Let me double check in the script. See, yeah, the way I did this previously is by just loading a whole separate scene for the instructions, which is also a valid way to do it. But if you have a lot of instructions, maybe that would be useful. And there's some stuff here for sound, but we will add that later. And let me check the lab, see if there's anything. Oh yeah, I also have stuff for like if you win the game or lose the game, but we haven't actually gotten that far in our game yet. So let's leave that until later. That's pretty easy to add in. Okay. So I think that's good. I'm gonna stop recording.